Okay, today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the whole language and psycholinguistics theories. And these were widely popular in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s. So, to start, I'm going to give you a little information about the psycholinguistics theory. So, this emerged in the 1960s and early 70s, and it was the intersection of psychology and linguistics. And one of the big things in this theory is how language is processed. And this theory states that language is processed at deep structure levels, which means essentially that we remember meanings and of words and meanings of phrases and not individual words. So it definitely is not a behaviorist approach to language learning. In regards to reading, this theory states that prediction plays a large role in the reading process, and what that looks like is as a reader comes to a word, the reader is going to focus on the first few letters in the word, and then they're going to make a hypothesis, and if their hypothesis matches and makes sense, then they will proceed to read. If this approach fails, it's then that the reader will try a more bottom-up approach and attend to every letter that they see in the word. Another large part of this theory in regards to reading is looking at the child's errors, and errors are viewed as miscues, which really are a window into the reader's mind. And so as a reader has a miscue, did they read a word that still made sense in the passage, but it didn't match the word in the text? Or did they read a word that was visually similar to the text? And so when we pay attention to those things, we can really see how a reader is approaching the words. And then another thing that this theory really emphasizes is the use of authentic reading material. And it states that the key factors of reading lies with the child and his or her interaction with information and not necessarily materials. And it's really because this theory is so focused on meaning that we need to give authentic reading material to students so that they can make meaning from those. And it was this theory that really laid the foundations for the whole language theory, which was really popular in the 80s and 90s. So when we look at language through the lens of the whole language theory, this theory states that language is central for communication and thought, and that learners will use language to solve meaningful problems, and this allows them to take charge of their learning. The key word in that phrase is meaningful problems. This theory also states that the medium in which learning takes place is language. So as we proceed through school and life, we are learning language, we are learning through language, and we're learning about language. So language is a key factor in learning. So similar to psycholinguistics, there is a focus on real reading and real writing from the very beginning. So what this looks like in a whole language classroom is there is a use of big books, trade books, there's a lot of thematic unit strands, and there's writing development from the very beginning of school. And how this works is when children come to school, children in the U.S. live in a literate society, so they bring some level of print awareness with them to school, and that's where we start building from, is the print awareness that kids come to school with. And in whole language theory, traditional school concerns are integrated and not taught in isolation. So what this means really is that things like spelling and grammar, they're not skills that are taught in isolation. They're integrated into study where the teacher thinks it's appropriate and will be meaningful. So some of the theorists that whole language draws from would be Dewey, and Dewey states that learners need to participate in their learning through solving problems that are meaningful to their lives, and whole language would definitely have this piece in it. Another theorist is Piaget, and with his idea that children need activity with external concrete objects to construct meaning into their own worlds. And then another one would be Vygotsky. So we know with Vygotsky, he has a zone of proximal development. And while the learner in whole language is ultimately responsible for their own learning, they will be supported through the teacher. And play will also be a very important role in their learning. So, to sum it up, the big idea with whole language theory and psycholinguistics theories is that they are child-centered. So it is a holistic approach that meets the learner's strengths and acknowledges learning strengths and meets children where they're at and builds from there. This was a grassroots movement, so because it really came from that background, it's always evolving and it's a very dynamic theory. And then the last one would be whole language values differences of learners. With this theory in mind, we know that children are all coming from different backgrounds. They have different things that they know, different schemas, and this approach to learning and reading values those differences and does not focus on conformity. And here are a couple references that I used to make this slideshow if you're interested in reading more. Thank you.